Octomat, gaining awareness of the energy body. If we compare an infant who lacks coordination with a dancer or a gymnast trained to execute the most complex movements, one can only begin to have a hint of the colossal effort that the warrior has to expend in his training before he can reach the awareness of the energy body. And this is only possible by first achieving the awareness of the physical body. In general, to achieve it requires arduous work in healing and exercising. That's done by means of therapy, as much as organic as psychological. Here is not the place to try to explain the organic treatments, since they are different from individual to individual. But it does make sense to treat the topic from the psychological level, because this we can reach by means of words, which, no matter how far-fetched they may seem, they always open a space through the luminous mass. So the propositions, although extraordinary, become part of our total being. At first, perhaps as mere fantasies or mental gymnastics. However, as it gains strength, an idea can become power. And in this way, one can come to great realizations. That's the reason why warriors choose so carefully where they focus their attention. The awakening to awareness should be done first in an explanatory and orderly manner. However, some sorcerers don't think this way, and they throw the apprentice into the water, so to speak, and let them learn how to swim by themselves alone. Many have died by following that method, and this has contributed in great measure, even among practitioners of sorcery, to an increase in the bad reputation of the nawals. To achieve a true effect, the apprentice should open up to all possibilities, reasoning that the world is, in fact, much more mysterious than our wildest fantasies. At the psychological level, the only thing we have to do to perceive energy is to accept its existence. But this is not as simple as saying, I accept. The matter is a little more complex than that. What the sorcerer calls acceptance is a total and absolute conviction. There shouldn't be even the tiniest shadow of a doubt. This is a level at which faith becomes experience, and then first-hand knowledge. I don't believe that I have an energy body. I feel it. I perceive it. I am the energy body acting through the physical body. Among my comrades, in the beginning, we received the task of repeating sentences like, I am an energy field. I feel the energy. I perceive the energy. I feel my assemblage point. If one begins to repeat statements like these, the force of suggestion opens a trail to awareness. And what in the beginning were mere intellectual statements become real perception. It's as if an inner seal or a barrier is broken. It's true that to achieve such a grade of certainty, extra energy is needed. This can be accumulated through following a series of strategies known as the way of the warrior. That includes the organic therapy, the exercises to strengthen the will and the physical body, and all the rest. However, in the end, what really matters is how impeccably one lives. For those who are on the path, learning the process and getting ready for the transition is the best thing to do. Many readers regret not being able to experience the same thing that Carlos experienced under Don Juan's tutelage. However, if somebody had those experiences without being prepared beforehand, the surest thing is that he would die, either from an inadequacy of energy or from the tremendous impact that causes the divided perception, as well as the trips to alternative worlds. The asylums are full of casual seers. The consciousness of the energy mass is achieved in the same way that the awareness of the physical body is reached, by realizing it. What counts is to realize it. Now it's difficult to remember, but in the beginning, we pass years learning how to perceive and how to use our physical body. In the same way, one should take the necessary time to perceive each vibrant fiber that we're composed of. When we do it, we end up feeling and perceiving energy directly. To do that, It's of vital importance to search for silence, since while we're distracted by the internal dialogue and the projections of the mind, it's impossible to be aware of other more subtle levels. One basic exercise is to contemplate one's own hands. The bundle of energy that forms us is a vibrant bubble, aware on many levels. Its complement, the physical body, is the energy factory from which it feeds. The energy body, as Carlos properly calls it in his works, is intuitive and it tries to communicate with the self all the time, but with very little success. The reason for this is that most people are stupefied by the forces that impel us, such as the passions, desire, the sense of possessing, etc. Also, the energy body doesn't speak through words, but rather it communicates directly by means of feeling and intuition. For seers, a person is a bundle of energy lines that resembles fibers of light. These lines are connected with all that exists around us, as if they were tentacles. For example, when two people are near each other, they don't need words to perceive the feelings that are shared between them. They know at an intuitive level. Many times, people can't explain why sometimes they feel sympathetic towards some, while repelled by others. The reason is because in some way, we all perceive at the level of energy. We're an organic mass with a capacity of generating energy that allows us to transcend the material level. In fact, even without being conscious of it, people surpass the physical barrier all the time. By thinking or feeling, or when dreaming, we're acting from a different perception that's obviously not at the physical level. Likewise, it's possible to extend one's energy out of sheer will to the point of touching an object or person. In the same way, one can perceive the intention that exists behind everything. By achieving it, one becomes highly intuitive. Some sorcerers even learn how to manipulate those energy tentacles. They expand or contract them at will. They move these tentacles to produce effects in the surroundings, be it on animals or people. There are some who, using those fibers, are capable of impressive acts of balance, flying, or moving objects. The secret to expanding or contracting the luminous filaments is very simple. Anyone can attempt to do it. To expand, you only need to take a deep breath in a standing position, while arching the thorax lightly back, stretching the arms to the sides of the body, deploying the hands and the fingers until reaching the limit. So, in the final position, one is looking at the sky. In the next movement, they use the hands or the center of the body to expand the luminous fibers. It's done with vigor, while exhaling completely and forcefully. To contract, the process is the inverse. The sorcerers are accustomed to compressing and closing energy every time that they feel they should do it, as in the case of some aggression or when something is uncertain. The procedure is also very simple. They bow down almost to the floor, clenching their fists at the sides of their heads and compressing their bodies while they inhale deeply, and intending that their fibers fold back. A variant of that exercise is to sit down on one's right ankle, while keeping the left knee up as a kind of shield. Another immediate practice that anyone can put to use is to perceive the eating and digestion process from another perspective. That can be accomplished by turning the act of eating into a deliberate intent of awareness. The objective is to be aware of each mouthful of food, from the process of the chewing and swallowing of the food to the point where one can distinguish how it goes through the esophagus and digestive system. It's even possible to perceive how the blood absorbs the nutrients, as well as the route the waste takes as it proceeds all the way through to the final expulsion from the body. Although the process is simple, in the beginning a tremendous discipline and force of will is required from the participant to carry out such exercise. This procedure is almost as difficult to pull off as recapitulation is in its initial stage. A more specialized use of this knowledge is to reach the dream body. This process also begins with repetitive orders until reaching the absolute certainty that you're a dreamer and that you remain conscious while you sleep. That also takes effort. Apart from persistence, the most important thing is to fulfill the requirement of keeping quiet about your achievements, since in the kingdom of the inorganic beings, secrecy is the number one rule. As we can see, from the simple acceptance of the world as an energy field, we can derive from that a wide range of possibilities that expand more and more according to our energy capacity. Just as is the case with laboratory researchers, there's no reason to remain on a path if after some time we find that verifiable results are not achieved, or that it's not useful for something. The other. In one of our talks, Carlos told me that he had reached an agreement with the inorganic beings, and that soon he was going to leave. He affirmed that that would be the last time we saw each other, and that in his place, the other Carlos would come, and that he didn't know what the parameters of his behavior would be. I felt shocked by his statement, although I didn't understand very well what he was referring to. But you'll still be yourself, right? Or will you be different? Or how will you be? I asked, disoriented. He told me that the other would take control of his body, and that while he still looked like him, he would no longer be him at all. But will you remember the people and the events of your life? He explained that the other world would have total access to his memory. So yes, he would remember everything and everybody. He said that he was just sorry about not having enough time to carry out what he called the plan of the Nawal. It was about something he had told me previously. It was an incredible maneuver that he had planned together with the witches, in which they would open a crack between the worlds. Sorcerers, as a joke, call that fissure in space-time the cosmic vagina. The idea was that all those who were prepared could pass through that opening. On one occasion, he even foresaw a possible scenario in which after crossing to the other side, there wouldn't be anybody there to close the opening, which would continue growing and growing like a black hole. First, the mail carriers would be swallowed up, then the policemen who would come to investigate, and so on and so forth. With a very serious look, he said, "We know that it's a very risky proposition, but others have already done it in the past. And I believe that we also can do the same thing with the help of our body of practitioners. If it doesn't work, I could die," he concluded somberly. My future encounters with Carlos were no longer the same. On one hand, he was the same man, but in some way he was no longer the same person. He was involved in scandalous affairs with women and began to give big seminars. He became a manager. He made the magical passes available to the masses, calling them tensegrity. And then, because of his physical deterioration, he left everything in the hands of the women. Don't get me wrong, I think they did magnificent work. They brought some of their practices to those who didn't have anything. And among the hundreds of movements that they practiced, they were sure to include those that the Nawal left engraved with his intent. He told me about that on one occasion, when after demonstrating a movement, he said, "This pass is a safeguard in case of emergency. It's imbued with a special intent. It's like a code that will enable the practitioners, after finishing their time on this earth, to unite with the group of the Nawal on the other side." With this, Carlos left open a wonderful opportunity to all those who want to take advantage of it. He opens the doors and welcomes those who want to go together into this fantastic adventure, placed before them simply by having been born. The plan of the Nawal did not become reality as he thought on that occasion. But now, with thousands of practitioners of the movements, a new opportunity has arisen, and crossing over to the Nawal is still possible. Carlos already leveled the road, and now it's open to those who want to traverse it. So far, from this point of view, what practitioners of tensegrity are doing makes all the sense in the world. They're getting ready for the encounter with the Nawal. The sorcerers of both lineages speak of the other side as a place where activities continue after leaving the physical form, and that there too, one has to fight for survival, just as they do here. In that way, at least, there are no changes. The seers see how when dying in this world, the energy body separates from the physical body with a crack. And depending on the level of attention, discipline, and preparation of the person who undergoes the transition, two things can occur. Either he forgets himself almost instantaneously, or he's able to maintain conscience. In which case, if he has the capacity to meet with his community, he will surely have greater opportunities to endure. Venturing to the other side is no joking matter. Rather, it's like entering a forest full of ferocious animals. That, in and of itself, is a good reason why someone should know and practice the magical passes. Part 2. Stories of the lineages. On one occasion, we were having a snack in Doña Silvia's kitchen, seated around the rustic wooden table, enjoying delicious nut bread that she had made according to her own recipe. I asked her if she knew how our lineage had begun. Making a polite gesture, she covered her mouth with her hand and nodded her head. She left her glass of atol on the table, and then she told a fascinating story, explaining that the event she was narrating had happened in very old times, long before the Spanish conquest. She added that these events took place not very far from where we lived now. She said that in that village there was a young Indian named Atlok. It happened that on a day of intense storms, Ehecatl, the god of the winds, took him up into the air with a strong gale. She said that after that, he disappeared, and that nobody knew where he had fallen. They looked diligently for his body, but they couldn't find him. Everybody in town accepted that he died. However, after years of absence, one day the young man returned. He was changed. He looked very strong and fearsome. According to the story, the young man related what had happened to him. He said that he felt as if the hand of Hecatl had taken him, but that soon after that, he lost any recollection of the event. When he woke, he realized that he was in a strange place. He was almost mistreated, almost dead. He said that between hallucinations, he saw how unknown people were taking care of him. When he could speak, he wanted to know where he was and who they were. They told him plainly that he had been badly wounded and that they were curing him. When he had enough strength, he discovered that the wind had taken him very far from his home. He said that it was the desire of destiny that he fall precisely over the shack of a Nawal sorcerer who had been waiting for a successor for many years. He knew immediately that that young man had been sent to him and took him as an apprentice. Doña Silvia told us that the Nawal Atlock was the founder of our line, and that the previous ones, his teachers, were of another type of sorcerer that has very little to do with what we are. She said that Atlock became the healer of his village. With the help of beings from the other world, he learned all about the plants and the curing of the sick. He became so different from his predecessors that starting from then, a new beginning is marked. I was very interested in this topic, so when I had the opportunity, I asked Don Melcher about Atlock and how many more lineages existed, and if he personally knew of any. "There is as many lineages as necessary," he answered. On another occasion, he explained that in the same way that each family has its peculiarities, the same thing happened with groups of sorcerers. I asked him for an example, but he, in his usual way, said that I would discover it for myself. I thought he said that only to avoid answering my question, however. However, he was right, because only a few weeks later, we were invited to a celebration in a neighboring town. As the activities went on, the participants consumed the delicious regional plates, and they enjoyed the song and dance performances. The children ran barefoot among people as if they were little goblins, filling the air with their screams and laughs. Everything was going perfectly, until suddenly the sky closed with some dark, large storm clouds. A strong wind lifted the canvases and pulled up the colored paper ornaments that hung in front of the church. It had already begun to rain, and everyone scurried to look for refuge. Everything indicated that the celebration had finished. It was then that one of the old men took off his hat and walked to the middle of the soccer field, not very far from where we were. The wind roared strongly, whirling his hair that was grayed by the years, and soon after, he lifted his eyes to the sky and stood looking at it for a moment. Then he opened the arms to each side and spoke aloud, but from where I was, I couldn't hear what he was saying. Then I watched as he began to blow toward the clouds, and suddenly the sky cleared. The sun came out, and the activities continued as if nothing had happened. I was surprised and marveled at his ability. I knew at once that he was a man of power, so I went to speak with him. He used the traditional Mexican courtesy, extending the hand to greet me as he said, "I'm Maximino Huerta. How can I serve you?" I spent as much time as possible by his side. We became friends. He told me that I could call him Max. I bombarded him with questions. I said that I was interested in knowing the procedure for moving the rain away. He explained that what counted when blowing the clouds was the intention associated with it. I love to chat with Don Max. When we said goodbye, he invited me to visit with him someday in his town. Los abuelos, the grandparents, commented to me later that Don Max belonged to the lineages of those people known as graniceros, hailstoners. They added that day he had given us an extraordinary demonstration of how they are able to control the climate. I had already heard something about the graniceros and about their prowess. They saw that they fly among the clouds and that they ride to the lightning itself amid the storms. In Mexico, there are many stories in which people talk about witnessing fireballs that float in the air, generally around mountains. People of the towns call them witches. The graniceros are those who control the winds, the rain, and the hail. In fact, it is said that to belong to this fraternity, it's essential to have been pointed out by the lightning itself. For some reason, I felt a great curiosity about them. So one day I decided to go visit their town. Don Max received me like a lost son. As we chatted while drinking a tea made of herbs that he had picked behind the house, I commented about how on one occasion I was struck by lightning. He laughed and told me that he knew it because he could see the mark that event had left in my body, adding that the same thing had happened to him. He told me the history of how the lightning touched him. He said that day he went to work in the cornfield as usual. He brought his animals with him to pasture. He related that suddenly the weather turned and a thunderbolt fell upon them. In an instant it struck 2 of his sheep, and it left many others injured. He said that he himself received such a strong charge that he lost consciousness, and that when he woke up, he saw that he'd been tossed into a puddle of water. And he explained that after that day, his life changed forever. During our chats, I asked Don Max what the secret of controlling the climate was. He didn't answer me. Without further explanation, he took me to a place in the nearby mountains. We walked for almost an hour. The landscape was beautiful. We stopped in the middle of a field with an open sky. From the traces that could be seen in the ground, it seemed that in the past, somebody had planted a corn crop there. In that place, and without any other instruction, he told me that I should summon the rain. He left me alone and went to sit down on the edge of the field. I didn't know what to do. I tried in vain. It must have been funny because he was laughing at my attempts. Beside the fact that we were not in the rainy season, on that day in particular, it was clear and dry, without a single cloud in the sky. After a while of clumsily gesticulating, trying without success to summon the rain, I gave up. I made a gesture of impotence toward him, and Don Max came to where I was standing. To help, he taught me a kind of prayer. He explained that he had not said it before because he wanted to see how well I bonded with Mamat Lali, or the spirit of nature. He urged me not to stop until the rain fell, even if it takes 100 years. For a long time, I repeated the invocation again and again. I was not able to make it rain, but sure enough, in the area that we were in, clouds began to appear in the sky. I felt tired, frustrated, and in a bad mood. I grumbled to him that I couldn't do what he requested because it was impossible. When he heard me say this, Don Max lifted his arms with great force, and immediately a bolt of lightning illuminated the sky with its blinding light, striking scarcely 20 meters away, just in front of us. The roar was so strong that out of sheer fright, I cowered in the place where I was. My bladder let loose, and I urinated in my pants. I believed that I was going to die right then and there. Suddenly, I don't know from where, large, dark storm clouds arose, and it began to rain. At first, it was only a few drops, but then a cloudburst formed that forced us to run in search of shelter. Because of that experience, my body has become afraid. Even to this day, I'm terrified of electric storms. But I must admit that from that time on, I felt that in some way my body assimilated the teaching, because just after that, I developed a strange capacity of being able to predict the weather. It's a strange sensation of being connected with the environment. In Mexico, there are a great variety of lineages of knowledge, each one with their own goals and their own peculiarities. During the years I've been traveling on this path, I found a great diversity of tendencies. Some form groups of knowledge sharing a line, while others are totally different. Sorcery is a very dynamic matter. Groups and even lineages arise, while others disappear. A long time before having established the practices for the masses, Carlos affirmed that his energy structure didn't allow him to form warriors groups. He said that he didn't have enough energy for that. Those who had the opportunity to attend his chats can attest to this, as he openly criticized those people who pretend to organize some work together. He said that the groups only serve to exacerbate one's personal importance. However, at the beginning of the 90s, he began to teach the magical passes more openly, and it was then that he began to call them tensegrity. As an explanation, he said that it was an architectural term whose goal was to reach the balance between tension and relaxation, in which the body performs with efficiency and economy. At the present time, the practitioners of that discipline are the modern followers of that old Toltec method of knowledge. For the Toltecs, it's necessary to understand that they're the practitioners of some of the arts that lead to knowledge. In general, the number of members of a group of warriors that follows some of the traditional paths is much smaller. Tensegrity, however, is a different case. Currently, the organization consists of thousands of practitioners and what has almost become a kind of religion. There are traditional sorcerer lineages that have endured for centuries, still completely following the ways of old. But that's not to say that they, for any reason, have any advantage over the others. The playing field is level. On the other hand, there are so many new tendencies arising that they even don't have names for yet. In the annals of the families, there have been many instances in which a group strayed so far from their original tradition that it became a new line, which is exactly what happened to Atlock. This is the way, then, that new lineages arise. This also appears to be the case with tensegrity. Carlos said that a Nawal has authority, and that it's his obligation to find new and better ways to achieve the goal. In this battle, everything is valid. The means don't matter. What really matters is that they succeed in activating the connection with the spirit, without which there is no method or lineage that's worthwhile. A subjective vision. There are those who follow the lineage of the pre-Hispanic traditional dancers, well known as concheros, shell wearers, because of the bells they carry tied to their ankles. They are a very numerous fraternity. We can find them almost everywhere in Mexico. It seems that there's a group in every town. It's very easy to find them. In general, they're in the religious parts of the towns and in the ceremonial centers. They are very fragmented, and each group can have subgroups with their own goals and purposes. Although surely at the present time, there are groupings that do their dance for mere amusement or simple gymnastics. There still exist among them some that are true traditional sorcerers, still following the path. Those sorcerers are the guardians of the knowledge. In their dance movements and expressions of praise, they hide many secrets of power. I had the fortune to know some of the original captains, so I could understand the message that the tradition of the old dancer brings. Carlos not only knew the dancer Zacatecas, but for a certain time he was in contact with other groups. For those who go in search of knowledge, this could be an open door. As I've explained previously, I had the fortune of being integrated in a millennial line of healer sorcerers called Tikis, which is one of the oldest lines of traditional knowledge that we know of. But surprisingly, it's also one of the least known. They're unique because this line not only values the art of healing and of good ways to live, but they're also fully devoted to the search for freedom. The groups of healers are subdivided into several specialized types. For example, there are the hueseros, bone workers, that at present time are known as chiropractors, the sobadores, massagers, who today are called masseurs and masseuses, and there is also the branch of those who know the secrets of the plants that nowadays are known as herbalists. Others use acupuncture to treat the sick, while there are also those who cure by using passes to clean energy. One should take into account that in all the branches of knowledge, we'll always be able to find the full range, from very committed sorcerers with their traditions to charlatans, who are only after profit. In the same way, there also exist among the healers those that do their work in an altruistic way, without any interest other than helping those in need, while others are only interested in making money. One can find sorcerers for rent almost everywhere. They're professional charmers who make a business of their gifts. In general, the risk they run is that of being consumed by greed, and because of this, they're derailed and lose their way. One can find them in the markets or in classified announcements of the newspapers offering their services. Among these, it's difficult to find any who are dedicated to the spirit. Most are windbags who copy the therapies of the sorcerers, but in fact, they're not able to cure anybody because they don't know what they're doing. People have to be careful not to be deceived by those who are only looking to line their pockets. However, it's possible that there are among the sorcerers for rent some who manage the art of the intervention with the help of spirits. These types do all kinds of harm because it's known that it's much easier to cause ill health than to cure. Those who approach this kind of sorcerer should know what they're exposing themselves to. There is also the Hikuri, Huichol, Wixarica Brotherhood, well known as the Payoteros, who have also splintered into diverse groups with different interests. It's only beneficial to work with those who don't try to make a business of this sacred plant. In addition, there are the Temascaleros, sweat lodge operators, who have their own traditions and stories. They use steam therapies to reach special levels of awareness. There are also the voladores, flyers of the sacred pole, who have their epicenter in the town of Panpantla, Veracruz. They follow a very strict discipline. In the search for knowledge, what counts is the disposition and the humility with which one approaches it. To have any chance to succeed, the aspirant has to put himself within reach and to summon great patience until the spirit is revealed. In popular Mexican folklore, even if people avoid speaking of the topic, everybody knows about the existence of nawals. If you ask the common people, they'll say that they're sorcerers who can transform into animals, and that maybe they have a pact with the devil. The classic story that circulates among people, especially in small towns, tells about horrendous animals that come out during the night to do evil things. They tell of cases in which some animal was killed by the residents, and that the following day, what they found in its place was a naked dead person. Also among the nawales, there are several kinds of sorcerers, each with their own goals. Cases are known in which they just follow the tradition that they inherited from their ancestors. They suffer their transformations, almost as if it was a hereditary illness or a curse, and they continue that way out of inertia. They've lost the knowledge of how and why they do that they do. There are others that are known as diableros. Some of these are utterly aberrant. They have the capacity to transform into animals. But they do it for even more sordid purposes. Because, still to this day, there are those who suck the crowns of the heads of newly born children and drink human and animal blood in order to reach their dark objectives. These are what people often call chupacabras. Even other sorcerers fear them. Equally, there are a great number of esoteric groups that follow diverse Oriental lineages. Even if some of these keep secrets of power, they don't have much to do with the Mexican tradition. There's a variety of other groups of which I've only heard, such as the Sorcerers. They say that these sorcerers live around the Bacatete Mountains in Sonora, and that many confuse them with the Surims, which are inorganic entities of the other world that also live in those mountains. They say that they're very dangerous beings. Others are groups from the north of Mexico and south of the United States that practice the cult of the great white buffalo. Among their rituals is the habit of hanging a person securely only by hooks in the chest. They say that with this technique, they're able to have visions. The groups of abstract searchers are rare, and from among them, those who focus on the search for freedom are even fewer. It requires great effort and dedication to reach the clarity of purpose. Only this can provide the warrior with the necessary trust to keep walking in a straight line. The clarity is only reached by having a sober mind, using the available resources appropriately, and making use of all possible information. To, as Carlos put it, fall in love with knowledge. He said that only the idea of death can give us the necessary force to act. Thus, with sobriety, clarity, and the awareness of our pending death, the warrior outlines his strategy. It's not convenient to go through life without a defined strategy. The most probable thing is that this would only lead to disaster. On some occasions, when the apprentice reaches the goal by himself, he can become a leader of a new group, or a solitary bird. Called that because they are the kind of sorcerers that venture alone into the infinite. Some say that these warriors have not overcome the problem of personal importance, while others think that they're supreme warriors who have gone beyond the human, and that they don't need any recognition or aid. For many of the countless groups of adventurers that dare to go on the definitive trip together, the way their groups are conformed is a secondary matter. In a prison world like the one in which we live, any intent of escaping is valid. With the right disposition and time, it's very feasible that anyone who attempts it will be able to find his place. Because, as surely as there is a ground where we place our feet and a sky above our heads, the Spirit has a special design for each one of us. The Native Americans have 1,000-year traditions of searchers who have attempted the leap to freedom in all imaginable ways. The most successful has been to form warrior groups following the pyramid structure. They say that the first ones begin to see energy and interact with the inorganic world by consuming power plants. Then, to continue with the exploration, they organized warriors groups following the patterns of the energy that they saw. In one of his lectures, talking about faith, Don Melcher told us, when a group of devoted collaborators faithfully join forces with inflexible intent, everything becomes possible. It's not a human decision who is chosen to be part of a group of warriors. That's the prerogative of power itself. For that reason, warriors look eagerly for signs because they know that when attempting to form the party, the spirit sends the necessary signs to take the following step, and so on. The reason why so many groups fail is because they don't follow the signs. Thus, Carlos was right when he said that personal importance makes a work of this type untenable. The War of the Sorcerers. Revising my notes, I found some annotations in which Carlos talked about La Catalina. He maintained that sorcerers are in a constant state of war, especially with sorcerers of other clans, saying, Don Juan used his enemy, the witch Catalina, to help me learn the secrets of sorcery. I had my doubts about how real the battles he described in his books could have been. He must have read my thoughts, or maybe my face showed some subtle expression of incredulity, because looking directly into my eyes, he reaffirmed that the confrontation that his teacher exposed him to was very real, and that old fucker almost got him killed. He added that Don Juan had a true fight with that woman, and that they both attacked each other. At that time, I didn't know what to make of that information. To think that a sorcerer as remarkable as Don Juan was involved in petty fights was something that seemed inconceivable. So I was not very sure that I understood very well the implications of what he told me. It wasn't until long after knowing the abuelos that those talks started to make some sense to me. In the beginning, it felt as if my life was a puzzle, with dispersed fragments of information everywhere. I saw it that way because little by little, the pieces were added and the concepts were getting clearer. The matter of the war between the sorcerers is an example of that. At night, after the daily tasks were finished, it was our habit to gather next to the fire to chat, either inside the kitchen or in the vicinity of the bonfire behind the house. I have verified that in general, modern people don't speak any longer. They barely share their experiences. Nowadays, although a family reside in the same house, they're apart. They all sit as if hypnotized in front of the television, and the only things they offer are trivial comments. Or worse yet, when each one is alone before their screens, even though they still live together, they're almost strangers to each other. I wish modern man would turn off the television and be together again in true companionship around the fire. In those meetings, we sang, recited poems, and spoke about almost any topic. Any event was reason for comments because it helped us to remember something interesting that they or some distant ancestor had experienced. In fact, it could be said that the stories told by the light of the flames are the cultural repertoire of our line. The chats were always informal, without turn-taking or niceties. Everything happened in the most natural way. Whoever wanted to could comment on something or tell some story, although in general, it always had to do with the topic that we were dealing with. It was in one of those meetings when for the first time I heard them mention the War of the Sorcerers. With the passing of time, I noticed that occasionally they referred to the topic, but always as an allusion or comment within the context of some other topic. However, those brief commentaries were enough to arouse my curiosity. I was itching with a desire to ask. But a good upbringing prevents us from interrupting in the course of a conversation. So I kept postponing the investigation of that topic until some more favorable moment at another time. But then something else would come up, and I would always end up deviating my attention. For some reason, the right opportunity to ask never appeared. So for a long time, I relegated that topic to the field of metaphors. When I finally tried to ask Don Sylvia, she opened her eyes wide and put her index finger on her lips. And with that, she insinuated to me that we don't talk about that subject. I accepted it without questioning. But of course, that fanned the flames of my curiosity even more. At that time, I supposed that as I was not completely familiarized with their customs and local expressions, it was all right to link their concepts and expressions to those that I was already familiar with in my dealings with Carlos. So that matter remained in my mind as mere background noise, without really knowing what to think about it. From time to time, I heard them mention something about the War of the Sorcerers, or as they called it, simply the war. In my ponderings, I believed that maybe they were referring to the path of the warrior. But little by little, I pieced together the evidence and realized that they were referring to a real war in which there were dead and wounded. On several occasions, I had requested to Don Melcher that he clear up the matter, but he avoided giving me a direct answer. He only shook his head and laughed in a strange way, as if he was hiding something. That encouraged me to keep investigating. I expected that someday I would find him in a good enough mood to tell me what it was all about. But in spite of my insistence, the only comment that I was able to get out of him was that I should pay attention to the stories that were told, and that in this way I could find the answers for myself. He was right in saying that because by hearing them, I could form an idea of what had already happened. When a good opportunity was presented, I confronted Don Melcher with a direct question. And why are they at war? Because that's what the situation is, he said, at the same time inviting me with a sign to sit down on some nearby rocks. This war has already lasted for centuries. At this point, nobody even remembers or cares how it began. The issue is so old that it has become a tradition. Seeing my expression of skepticism, he continued, but don't let yourself be deceived, because that doesn't make it any less real. Mentioning his benefactor, the healer, Jonas Zenancatle, he said that the war was useful to keep them sharp. It helped them stay awake. Knowing that we're at war and that at any moment we can be attacked helps us to stay attentive. To another question I asked, he answered that the last battle which had caused some deaths was already a long time ago. I think it was more than 10 years ago, he said with a strange smile on his lips. On another occasion, he himself told me that he had survived a confrontation with the cripple, the leader of the enemy group. He said that they had arranged a combat among the participants of both groups, using nothing more than the macuahuitl, a pre-Hispanic weapon par excellence that consists of a stick with sharp tips of obsidian tied along the length of it, so that if you give someone a blow with it, it could very well hurt the enemy. But they say that the first blow is rarely mortal. In his words, however, during the fight, one of them drew his machete and killed one of our partners. As a result, the others responded by grabbing their own machetes, and they finished off 2 of them, and several more were sent to the hospital with serious wounds. I myself received a wound in my left shoulder. He opened his shirt and showed me a scar of about 20 centimeters on his muscular torso. But having received that, I returned the favor with interest. And that's the reason why they call him the cripple. Thanks to me, that son of a bitch walks with a limp, he said with a broad smile. Now that you walk with us, he continued, you're also at war with them. They already savored your blood that time when they beat you and left you on the verge of death. So take care, because this is for real. When seeing my bewildered, even incredulous expression, he said, "What? Don't tell me you thought that being a warrior was only an intellectual exercise. If you did, you're already screwed. This is for real here. Either you kill or you die." His warning shook me. They brought out a kind of fear that I had never known before. I became more apprehensive and much more attentive to what transpired in my surroundings. But somehow I still refused to believe that there was any real danger. However, with time, I gathered enough proof that I was indeed being watched from afar by hidden eyes. The first time that I was really aware of what was happening was when I had to go alone to the market in town on an errand. It was the middle of the afternoon, but the sky was heavy with big dark storm clouds, and it seemed like it was almost night. Once there, I could feel the aggressive looks of a group of peasants who were drinking pulque in a place on the other side of the street. I didn't pay them too much attention. I went about my errands and then went out to the street. It was then that I noticed that they were following me. I watched as 2 of them separated from the group with clear intention of cutting across my path up ahead. And I remembered the stories that I had heard, and I was filled with panic. I felt a knot in my stomach. I was sure that they wanted to kill me. My heart was pounding. Nevertheless, I kept walking as if nothing was happening. But when I turned the corner, I started running as fast as I could and entered a narrow alley that led back to the main street. I knew that those who were chasing me were right behind me, but at the same time, I was aware that I was about to encounter the other 2 who had separated from the group. I didn't know what to do when suddenly I had a peculiar sensation that's hard to describe. Seeing, hearing, as the aggressors approached. And even before they got to the alley, in an almost instinctive way, my body remembered the instructions that I had received. So I sheltered myself by a stone gate, crouched down as if defecating, put my elbows on my knees, and raised my fists. And in this way, I covered my face with my arms. The men passed by without even looking at me. I saw how the 2 groups gathered ahead not very far away, and I heard how they expressed their bewilderment at having lost me. They talked for a moment, and then they left. That was how I lost them. But from that day on, I never again walked carelessly as I used to do before. It's incredible how the body reacts when faced with the threat of death. Suddenly everything gains meaning. I kept participating in and fulfilling my tasks. However, only after I was fully accepted among the warriors was the matter completely revealed to me. They included me in their strolls, in which we went armed to, as they said, stalk the prey, meaning that we would go out to spy on the rival group. Fortunately, nothing else of any seriousness has happened. The last scuffle we had occurred a while ago, It happened at a religious party in a town in the south of Mexico, where we ran into some members of the rival group, and we plunged into a fight that became a free-for-all. Although it resulted in some injuries, there were no deaths. That day, as it happened, we went for a walk in the square of that traditional town nestled in the mountains, when suddenly we met with Miss Lola and her friends, who were apprentices of the cripple. When he saw us, she tried to use witchcraft against us, but one of our female warriors took a bar of iron from a sales tent and broke her skull. Later, I found out that the wound required more than 20 stitches. The rest of us made do with some punches and black eyes. After that, on their part, there were several attempts against us, but we were always able to defeat them, although we sometimes paid a steep price. So the war goes on, and we all always live in a state of tense calm. In fact, I already forget what it's like to live any other way. After all these years living with the healers, we learned that for a sorcerer, the normal state is to be alert the whole time. By accepting the fact that we're at war, we're able to destroy the worst of all enemies, the ego that prevents us from seeing with clarity the messages of the spirit. Dealing with external enemies is one thing, but coexisting with a group of apprentices is a challenge for all the participants. Confrontations among the various elements are unavoidable. Sometimes real fights break out that end up leaving people injured in multiple senses. In the end, however, the Nawal and the goal of the freedom always ends up prevailing. It was the abuelos who encouraged the apprentices in such behavior when they created the game of Attack the Idiot. It was a kind of mischief that consisted of bothering, even physically assaulting, any group member who got distracted or was out of sync. They would whack him with a stick, or throw a bucket of cold water on him, or any other act of cruelty that occurred to them. In the beginning, I considered that practice an intrusion into my personal space. But with time, I had to admit that the use of that strategy created the appropriate atmosphere to help each other stay alert, with the extra advantage that it helps to polish the roughness of the ego. One can compare these attacks among comrades to the friendly fights between felines that keep them in form. It's very true that sometimes we learn only from blows, but that's due to the resistance of the ego. And, as our teacher always said, that's nothing in comparison with what waits for us out there. Only when we get a glimpse of the infinite do we realize that all human matters are irrelevant. If the ego can't deal with mundane matters, it's certain that it won't be able to confront the terrifying unknown that's waiting for us. For that reason, the only thing that really counts in the warrior's life is impeccability, and there's nothing better than being constantly under the threat of death to achieve it. I remember how shocked I was the first time I found out that the abuelos of both groups had plotted among themselves to help the new ones. The help usually implied some horrible fight or something worse. That was exactly what happened to me the day they attacked me. At that time, I believed that my meeting with those hoodlums up in the hills was just a coincidence. But today, I know that it was a trap prepared by them to hook me. So in a certain way, with our confrontations, we give continuity to the tradition of the ritual, flower wars, that we inherited from our ancestors. However, there's no room for error, because even when there's an accord between the combatants, the danger is real, and one faces death at each turn of the road. In my case, if it was not for the care I received from my teacher, I'm sure that I wouldn't have survived. I had already heard stories that in the world of the Nawal, one can only enter if he's already dead. In the beginning, I took this as something symbolic, but from what I've witnessed and from the stories I've heard, it's certainly the case, since each one of the warriors I know has similar stories, such as that of Margarito, who's one of my comrades. For him, the entrance into the world of the Nawal meant a real death. After having been pushed off the side of a cliff, he was taken to a hospital with serious wounds, and from there he was taken directly to the corpse depository because there was no longer anything that could be done for him. In the morgue, the doctor signed his death certificate. According to custom, the relatives hurried to arrange his funeral, but they said that during the funeral, a strange old man arrived. He approached the body and he whispered some words to it. Then he left without saying a word. They say that the deceased suddenly sat up in the coffin and began to speak, giving everybody a mortal fright, and that day he left with the Nawal, never to return. As for another of my partners, they brought him bleeding to see the abuelos after he received a knife wound in the chest. He only survived thanks to the care of the healers. And one other was brought in with an illness that had him more dead than alive. The abuelos were very strict with him. They said that if he didn't follow their instructions to the letter, he would die. So each one of us has our own stories. What will never change is the fact that we're all dying from the moment we arrive. Since I joined them, I've seen many come and go. Some say that they're interested in the knowledge of the healers, but soon reality sets in. For a while, Doña Silvia was even offering herbology classes on the weekends. However, in the end, we saw that everybody had other commitments. Some had to tend to their business, others to their families, their lovers, or their bad habits, so that nobody had time for the spirit. Now I understand why sorcerers say that they only accept those who are already dead. This is real. The truth is that only those who in one way or another have already died to the world remain in the fight. On one occasion, Don Melcher said, "Only those who are already dead can follow the path of sorcery." Then he clarified, "Of course, I don't mean being physically dead, but it does mean dying in a very definitive way, because then you've lost the human form." The task of losing the human form was, for me, a concept difficult to digest, especially with the tremendous attachment I had to the ego. For me, that was a gradual process. I barely noticed it. One day, however, I perceived that when something happened that previously would have upset me, I didn't care about it anymore. Then something else happened, and I realized that I had stopped feeling like I had felt before. I was still me, but with such detachment that I barely even recognized myself. I could understand then the lessons I had received about keeping our emotions under control. As Doña Silvia used to say, you must control your emotions, never allow them to control you. If you control your emotions, you'll control your life. There's a lot of confusion between paying attention to our intuitions and making decisions based on emotion. Sometimes not knowing how to recognize the difference can lead a person to disaster. Once, she said, gaining control of your emotions is of great importance. Keep your objectives clear and stop surrendering to your bad habits. Is it that simple? I asked, trying to get more information out of her. For sure, she said emphatically, and she clarified that by my vices, she was referring to my exaggerated reactions to everything that happened to me. She compared my emotions to a wind that shifted me from one side to another. Learning how to control myself was something very difficult for me. In a way, I resented having to stop doing things as I had always done. Since for me, the way of being was what I considered to be myself. But later, I could see that my personality was only a description that I had learned. It was not the real myself that I'd believed it to be. Rather, it was as if I lived in a theater, always playing a role that was not truly mine. By reining in my emotions, I understood that even though I could feel them, I had them under control. And if I wanted, nobody would ever know what I was feeling.